Ladies and gents, it's part 3 of Day 9 Daily number 336 with LiquidRet Especial. We're about to go into the second part of the second game. In part number 2, we talked a little bit about how Rhett was just playing off his opening so brilliantly in game number 2 with all this great tactical repositioning with all his Zerglings and Mutalisks. Thorzain stayed fairly passive, but even with that small area where Thorzain was packed on those 3 bases, even with that very, very small amount of area that Thorzain had to cover, Rhett was able to manipulate the positioning well enough to do these counterattacks. And you can envision against a more aggressive player, Rhett would be performing even more counterattacking. So we're going to hop into the second part of game number 2. Also in part 2 of this daily, we took a look at how Rhett got to this position. We saw some big differences, like the fact that he was cutting his queen production, just making 2 queens. And again, we see our Zerglings and our Mutalisks going in 2 different directions. Whoopsie doopsie daisy Thorzain, that is the opposite of what you want to do. But Thorzain is still going to escape with the lives of all his units. We do also see, look at these Zerglings pulling back behind the Mutalisks. Rhett is a big believer in conservation of Zerglings. He's very green in that regard. We see Thorzain being a little bit more aggressive in this here game, as he is getting his double reactored starport up. But as usual with the Mutalisks of LiquidRet, they're not going to be trying to suicide in to do a ton of damage. They're going to kill what they can, and they're mainly going to be used for repositioning of the enemy. Zerglings up at the top for counterattack, expansion in the opposite corner. If our opponent moves up here with forces to kill this off, we run the Zerglings up this way. And if Terran's forces are up here, look at how defended all our bases are. Oh my god, the Terran army's at the exact opposite side of the map. Likewise, if Terran moves in to try to hit us down here, these Zerglings move in. Oh, and Terran's at the opposite end of the map, trying to attack. How frowny. Another important aspect about LiquidRet is he's getting those layer upgrades very quickly. The Baneling speed is popping up the instant that Baneling nest is finishing up. And a surprisingly late evolution chamber. I say surprising because nowadays players are just going upgrade crazy and just upgrading their little hearts out right at the start of the game, often even favoring getting those upgrades before everything. We also see... where did my train of thought go? Oh yeah, I'm just going to repeat it because I got halfway through and then I started thinking about the fact that I haven't eaten dinner. And then my brain only began thinking about food. Let's try that one more time. So very often you're seeing players just get their upgrades really quickly, especially in Zerg vs. Protoss. Zerg vs. Terran is now taking up that trend as well. But keep in mind, what Red is doing is he's getting these units fast, and he's using them all to do amazing repositioning, so that way he doesn't even really get into a direct confrontation until the last thoughts. Or until the last moments of gameplay. So we see those Zerglings beginning to move their way up to the top. Yes, continuing to gather. Not a lot of Zerglings, just 18. He doesn't have a rally point up here, but units positioned opposite where he is expanding. You want to spread out your expansions when you have those fast units. Mutalisks still not moving into the main area of the map. Instead, they are just poking at the front, poking over here. And again, Thorzain, he loves getting 2 factories while still being on just 3 barracks. That is the big defining factor, I would say, of his Terran vs. Zerg style. He's very much so a straight-up attacker and an intimidating one at that. LiquidRet, gosh, he has so many drones. And you know what? I'm going to do something that I think is absolutely critically important. We're going to rewind, and we're just going to look at his drone production, especially from when the Spire is finished. This can be one of the biggest reveals. We see some Zerglings getting produced just now. That was to defend against all of those drops that were going on, but continue to direct your eyes up at this production tab. Here it comes, Mutalisks getting made. Mutalisks continuing to be made. Look at that very fast Baneling nest. When the Baneling nest finishes, we're going to see that speed upgrade for Banelings pop up very soon. Look just, there's the upgrade, there's more drones. And see, here's when the Mutalisks are just popping into the base. More drones, Mutalisks popping into the base. Look, 14 Zerglings. You can think of this as a round of Zerglings getting produced. This is like all the larvae popping off just once, and we're getting our 4th hatch. And look at this, going right back to the production again. We've really made hardly anything but drones this game, just Mutalisks as we can afford it. And continuing to poke at the backside of this base. And look at how split up these Terran buddies are. Uh-oh. How many of you have had a Zergling here spotting an expansion and it gets killed off? And what's your follow-up? I guess he's taking a third base. That's what you do, right? You just... Okay, that's okay. Well, not LiquidRet. He has Zerglings positioned ready to do the rocking of the face. How many of you keep these Zerglings all right here? So that way they just kill off a lot more Zerglings for free. I've certainly done that before, but don't. That's right, LiquidRet's going to keep everything positioned to the backside. He's going to send some more Zerglings. Not all of his Zerglings, though, as he's getting some more up. A couple more drones coming in. 83 drones en route. I think that might be a little teensy-toonsy bit overproducing. But notice the threat of the Mutalisk has left a lot of the units at the front. It has left plenty of units in the back. And it's just a quick 1-2-3 punch to rush up to this top side. Look at how tightly packed Thorzain is for the most part. Just staying on 3 bases, no attacking to catch any of his other units out of position. But LiquidRet just getting this out of position once. And see you later, Expo Gator. Creep brings spread across the map. It's a beautiful thing when you see LiquidRet position his things properly. How many Banelings does he have? None! No Banelings! He's only making those Banelings when all of a sudden he's going, oh, you're attacking, aren't you? Well, with all these Zerglings positioned all around the map, and all these Mutalisks doing counterattacks around the map, you buy yourself time to stock up on a frick butt ton of Banelings. He said without saying anything that wasn't PG. So this is an extremely impressive instance of, yeah, you know, he's going Mutaling, but it's not as simple as just herp derp by Mutaling. There you go. He is ready and prepared to make Banelings, as we've seen. He already has the speed. We see him upgrading this melee attack, which makes your Baneling so potent against those Marines. Once again, Thorzain just positioned in defense mode. LiquidRet continuing to just pull these things apart. And as you're watching this, you know what I'm noticing? I'm noticing this thing. LiquidRet, he's poking in here. This is a little bit too far in, but the fact that he moved in is just an example of his style, of why his ZVT is so potent. And you know what you really do not feel comfortable doing in this spot as Terran? Dropping. I do believe it is possible if you can execute it very, very well, but you certainly are demotivated from doing it. Zerglings and Mutalisks, once again, at opposite sides of the map. Here is a drop. LiquidRet does have some defense here. But Thorzain, who's one of my absolute favorite players to watch, just cannot quite have an answer to it. Once a drop does get pulled off, and we see all the Mutalisks pop down, this is almost always the point in time when Terran seizes control. Is when these Mutalisks that are so critical in hitting the backsides, in poking and prodding here, and in denying this third, when they are back home for defense. This is what MMA you see do, and in my famous phrasing, he hurls dropships at the opponent, losing lots of units without doing much damage, all to mess up the positioning of the Zerg. Yes, dropping is possible, as we've seen. You feel demotivated, but when you pull it off, this seems like a magical moment for you as the Terran player. Oh yes, I finally get the chance to move forward. No, you don't, you frickin' nerd. Look at all these Zerglings positioned and ready to rock the instant that this move out happens from Thorzain. The Zerglings step in as sort of a surrogate Mutalisk pack, right? Well, if my Mutalisks aren't going to keep you in check, then my Zerglings certainly will. And it's this use of both of these forces at opposite ends that I find so tantalizingly baller. There's the adrenal glands incoming. We see the upgrades, of course, the extra bases. We do see that greater spire getting produced. But with all this gradual repositioning, here comes in yet another big swing. I don't think it's actually going to go that well for Rhett this time. It's actually going to end up sustaining a good amount of losses. But notice how this is allowing Rhett to completely own his lead. He has no concerns at all. And hey, look, what do you know? I have some Zerglings positioned here. They're going to catch me out of position, you freaking dolt. I'm getting very creative with my insults today. You moronic jerk. Thorzain still keeping a lot of units pinned back. Rhett gently poking and prodding. Overlord's moving up to the top. Zerglings positioned to deal with the counterattack. Spine crawlers up. Would again love to see another Zergling pack up on the top side, but it looks like Rhett already gearing up to do a little bit of that. And now we see him poking at the front. This is a previous previously unpoked at force. He's just leading with a small number of Zerglings. That was maybe 20 in tops. This is the worst positioning Rhett has had with his Mutalisk all game long, and it just came on the heels of sacking a small number of units to do some big damage. And of course, the double drop going on, no problem. I have my Zerglings and Broodlords already well positioned. So you're starting to see the real true core meaning of when I say he's building Lings and Mutalisks, and maybe getting Banelings if he thinks an attack is coming. But every single time there seems to be an attack attempt or any pressure done by Thorzain, the units are just in the appropriate spot. They're rallied there. He's doing a lot of nice split-ups where he has some units on the right, some units on the left. He has good Overlord spotting on the map. I mean, if you look at LiquidRet's vision, look at how purple that map is, but also how much vision he has in addition. And the Broodlords sweeping to the front. And now finally Rhett gathers all his troops together and goes in for a big kill. Thorzain did nothing but defend all game long. And Rhett still just had too much and cracked the defense. That's very impressive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now open up the infamous Markio question grabber. None other than the infamous Markio question grabber. I'm logging in. I know my passwords. And Markio's question grabber, go! While the question grabber is going, would like to state that tomorrow is Fun Day Monday, where we would be looking at games where you start as Terran, you lift off your command center, and just land at another location, and then begin your game. Want to see all the creative solutions you have for just being not in your main at the start of the game. On Tuesday, we're going to continue our LiquidRet Especial and look at LiquidRet versus Naniwat in the grand finals of the EU Invitational. This was the winner bracket final. And then, coming up the week after that, or actually later on in the week after Tuesday, it is of course the US Blizzard Invitational that I'll be casting with none other than JP McDaniel. But after that, it's going to be all user-submitted replay week. We haven't done Newbie Tuesday in a while, so we're going to re-kick it back off with Newbie Week. There's going to be more details of how to submit coming up because we're going to sort of structure what sorts of games we look at. But it's going to be Newbie Week. We're looking at tons of your games because you're all fucking hot. Let's go ahead and look. Let's go ahead and look at this. So here we go. I'm out of tea. How depressing. Now, I looked at a great question. What is this? By Sly SC. Or perhaps it's Slissic. Dear Day 9, what do you think is the best way for Terran to deal with this counter-attack heavy Zerg style? It just seems like Terran can never move out. And if he doesn't, Zerg just gets stronger. So there are two schools of thought on this. One is to continue to build up until you are at a near maxed force. And then move out. You just resist, and then whoosh, move out for the attack. That has some success potential, but what I think is the more successful thing to do is to do a style that MMA you will see do very often. He just begins to start the aggression and to ramp it up more and more and more. You even saw in that game, there was a point where there was a drop down here and all those Mutalisks came on back. You can envision that if you had a force moving out and a small force to deal with a Zergling counterattack, suddenly those Mutalisks are on the defense all the game long. So it's big aggression, and in particular, multiple point aggression that I think is the big key. You will very often lose that medevac with almost no gain in a direct sense, but it indirectly gives you gain because the Mutalisks are just so far back that they can't do much. So you're going to have to get into positions where you're uncomfortably aggressive. Uncomfortably aggressive. Let us take more questions from you guys. Here's a question from Soulriser that I think is a great question. Dear Day 9, how would Rhett's opening fare against some sort of cheese? It seems too passive. So Rhett wholly embraces a line of thought that a lot of which came out of his Brood War experience, which is that, well, if I can't attack you early on, or I should even say more clearly, if I am electing not to do a big attack early on, then I better hugely exploit that in as extreme a way as possible. You see him get ridiculous amounts of drones early on, never forgetting a larva inject, and a ridiculously fast layer up. So he's like passive, 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 but in his passivity, the opponent's freaking out because of how much stuff he's getting. You know, it's a great example of passivity for Terran is I am MVP. Watch MVP, was it against Ret? Or no, it was against Dongregu on Xel'Naga Caverns. Those replays are up. I think you log into Battle.net and Blizzard has a download link provided within Battle.net. Of MVP against Dongregu on Xel'Naga Caverns. MVP just sits and hangs out and waits, and despite the fact that he's putting no pressure on his opponent, you're freaking out as Zerg, because so much shit is getting built in his base. I will say that perhaps against Cheese, Ret would struggle a little bit, but here's one of the most important statements I'm about to make on adjustment. So, often you'll have a style that will be really good against A and really bad against B. So, for instance, a Ling Stalker play, a Ling Infestor play can be really, really, really good against Stalker-based builds, but really weak against a Zealot Archon style build. And when you're struggling to think of what to do against your Zealot Archon build, this is so important that you do this. You think, how can I do something that would let me be weaker against the Stalker force so I can be stronger against the Archon force? Notice how you're eating in to all this strength you have against the Stalkers and giving it over to the Archon build. Because the problem is, you don't want to Hulk smash Stalkers and get murdered against Archons. You want to do something like just barely beat a Stalker player and also just barely beat a Zealot Archoning player. Too often what people do is they will say, man, I crush Stalker forces, yeah! And then against Zealot Archon, they're like, well, what completely different thing can I do to help this? And then what happens is they stay really good against the Stalkers, but they can never quite catch up. This is actually a discussion I was having with Destiny earlier, in case any of you were wondering. But with this sort of style, it looks really good if he's not under that much pressure, right? But what you would end up doing against someone like, or against a Cheese style play, is you would heavily cut things like the fastness of the Mutalisks, or perhaps the amount of drones that you're making. Because you're saying, okay, when I hold this off, I'm still probably going to be okay against that. And if he transitions back into something normal, well, I was really good against that, and I can just back down and be pretty damn good against that. So whenever you're thinking about like Cheese styles, be willing to embrace some of those losses, because when you regain your footing, you're still going to be in that good shape. We are now taking one more question. My God, you guys are asking great questions today. There's so many here. There's so many here. Scholarion. Dear Day 9, the style obviously relies a lot on positioning and counter-attacking. What would you suggest to do to make the style viable on maps such as Shakuras Plateau, where there are no clear counter-attack paths? What I would say is to experiment with forcing it to work, because there are actually surprising numbers of counter-attack paths. Let's say that your opponent is at the right and you're at the left. You can just keep Zerglings in the other main. If you keep 30 Zerglings over there, and then when he tries to move out to attack, you can slip up into his main. Especially when a player's taking his third. I mean, if you actually look at Backwater Gulch, which I'll just be opening up in the map pool. Let me just go to the multiplayer. 1v1, because I was playing some 2s earlier, and that did not go so well. How do I view these frickin' maps? You know what? I'm just going to load up the replay because it's an important enough point. There are situations where you don't think that there's enough counterattacks, but there really are. For instance, here, here's your natural expansion as Thorzain, and here's your third base up here. The only real counterattack path is this little wide open space if he has a bunch there. Pretend these rocks don't exist for a moment. We saw LiquidRet just slip right on up here into the main to do damage. Or likewise, if you have Mutalisks here trying to wail away at this third base, you can still slip Zerglings right in here to do damage. Same goes for Shakuras Plateau. Imagine a Terran at the top right. He has his main. Or here, I'll do it for you. He takes his main and then his natural, and then he goes down his ramp, and here's his third over here. Well, still, you can counterattack up into the main that way from below. There's a lot more space than you think you have. There's a tremendous amount of wiggle room that you can work with, slipping those things in, and you'll start to find that this style from Red is actually quite versatile on nearly any map. Boom! Did a daily. I'm hungry. I'm going to go eat food. You are all beautiful. Tune into Fun Day Monday tomorrow. We already announced what it was, so I'm going to be dunsies. Hope you had funsies. LiquidRet, congrats on number onesies. And now that the daily is wrapped up, enjoy the beautiful beats of Ludique on one of my favorite songs, Nightfall. See you guys. See ya. See ya.